Hello, I'm Richard Blackaby, and this is my brother Mel Blackaby. And Mel is the pastor, senior pastor of First Baptist Church, Jonesboro in Georgia. Has been doing that for about 6 years or so now.
Yeah.
And Mel, everywhere he's been as a pastor, and I've had the privilege of having him as my pastor on two different occasions, he's truly built a church that was a house of prayer. And Mel, why have you focused so much on that? And tell us some of the ways you've done that in a practical way.
I think there's probably several things. First of all, when I was called to ministry, I looked at myself and I didn't see how I could do it.
Neither did we.
Yeah, neither did anybody else. And so out of necessity, I just had the sense I had to cry out to God. If God didn't do something, I was going to fail. And so I've always had the sense that if I was not praying and engaging in the spiritual aspect of ministry, it's not just about what we do and our gifts and abilities, it's about what God does and the power of the Holy Spirit. And without prayer, we can't expect that He's going to be working. And so, personally, I always needed it. Mm-hmm. But then, biblically, Jesus said, "My Father's house will be a house of prayer." I had to struggle with that. Could I honestly say it is a house of prayer? We believe it ought to be, and we say it is, and we talk about the importance of prayer. Usually the problem is we don't do it. Mm-hmm. And so many times what we're saying to the people in the church is being negated by the fact that we're doing something different than what we say. No matter how much we say it's important, if it's not important in the church schedule, then it's not important.
Mm-hmm. And you pastor a big church now, and some people would say, well, to have a weekly prayer meeting or something, that's how we do our corporate prayer. But in a big church, how would you do corporate prayer in a big church?
Yeah, it is a challenge, but it's a challenge that ought to be taken.
Yeah.
When I came here, it was hard. Big churches have a lot of activities. And so the typical church, if they do have a prayer meeting, and not all do at this point, but if they do, it's usually on a Wednesday night. And at the very same time as the prayer meeting is the choir practice and orchestra practice and youth meetings and children's programs and discipleship groups. And it just seems like it's one among many ministries to be involved in. And so we've just taught people that it's one among many things we could do, and that's not my ministry, and so I don't do that.
Yeah. Well, even on Sunday mornings, the altar is typically filled with people praying. Tell me why you do that and how you do that.
Well, that tradition actually was here before I ever got here, but I've loved it. Just an opportunity in a worship service. Anyone needs to come and pray and bring their needs to God. It's part of our culture now. And so there's a real freedom just as a part of our worship. As we're singing to God and praising God, we also want to talk to God and bring our requests to Him. And so it's a natural part of our service. And I think that in alone, it does highlight how important it is. And they see others coming to the altar to pray. There's old people, there's young people, there's everything in between. The couples, there's families, there's a bunch of the youth who go together and pray. Mm-hmm. And it's been a real meaningful part of our service because it shows people that we're here to engage in the living God. It's not just singing to one another, we're singing to Him. It's not just talking to one another, we're talking to Him. And it really emphasizes the fact that He is there.
Yeah. And even on Sunday nights, you do something kind of unique called a Fresh Encounter service. Mm-hmm. And what is that you do? Because you incorporate prayer even in what used to be a traditional sort of Sunday night service. Well,
again, when I realized that there was not one single time throughout the week where all of the church could come to pray if they so chose to pray. Now, not everyone's going to pray, and I'm like any other pastor. I wish we did more praying. But, again, if we've scheduled them out of prayer time, they couldn't come even if they wanted to. Mm-hmm. So we just asked, Lord, where could we do that? How is it going to work? And so Sunday night has become the time when I called our prayer service. It's a Fresh Encounter prayer service, so that everybody who wants to come can come and engage in prayer. And it's been a great time. There's a didactic element where I'm leading them in praying and directing some prayer. There's testimony of answered prayer. There's music that's interwoven throughout the whole evening. There's specific praying that we'll do for different emphasis. And in many ways, it's teaching the people to pray as we are praying, and we're seeing God answer our prayers. And so it's been a great time.
And were the people just always receptive? Were they all excited about the fact, we're going to get to pray more? And services. And
No, it's an amazing thing. People would rather do something other than pray almost every time. And I'm not exactly sure why. That's just my observation that just tell me something to do, but to sit and be still and be quiet and to pray is become very uncomfortable. And I believe it's because Satan's trying to destroy our prayer life. Satan knows the power of prayer.
yeah.
And so even when we began to make a shift from a traditional Sunday evening service into this fresh encounter prayer service, I had a lot of resistance. I had people, let me just leave it at that. I had a lot of resistance. But the thing that I kept struggling with is I'm the pastor, and God will hold me accountable for how I shepherd his people. And no matter what kind of resistance I have, when I stand before God someday, I can't say, well, this person here was against it. And the Lord will say, and I called you to be the pastor, the spiritual leader, and you need to feed my sheep. And if they don't know how to pray, they're going to be weak, they're going to be sickly, they'll be out of touch with me, there'll be no power. And so I had to just really do what I felt like God called me to do. Now, there were others who were on board, and it wasn't like everyone was against it, but there was a vocal group who did not want to make that change.
And ultimately, God will ask you. I asked you to make this a house of prayer, and did you or didn't you? And a great challenge.
And every time I hear pastors say, "Well, I can't do that. Our schedule's too full. We're too busy," I keep coming back to the very thing, and say, "Who's the pastor of your church?"
Yeah.
God's going to hold you accountable for that. Now, you don't have to do it like I'm doing it, but just ask the Lord, how can we become a house of prayer? And he'll show you very different ways than what we're doing it, but some way in your church and in your culture and your schedule, you can find at least one time a week when the church can gather for prayer.